He's just determined, he is. And I'm so glad he's determined, aren't you? We have to be brought to the priest. And the priest, and isn't this beautiful, shall go forth out of the camp. He went out to the leper. What do we read in Hebrews 13? Do you remember that scripture? Turn to it with me. Hebrews 13, verse 13. Pick it up in verse 11. The bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought up into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without the camp. Wherefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Let us go forth therefore unto him without the camp, bearing his reproach. To go out and talk to a leper brought reproach. No one had a right to, but the priest would go forth out of the camp. You know, if we're going to follow Jesus out of the camp, I'll just mention this in passing, not definitely referring to the leper, but I've noticed that any man that follows Jesus, sooner or later he's going to have to leave the religious camp, if he ever got into one, and follow God outside of it. The Lord suffered without the gate of religion. And anyone that's going to follow him has got to follow him in the same place. Let us go out to him outside the camp. And so, the priest had to go out to where the leper couldn't come in. No way. No way. So he had to go out to him. We couldn't come to God, so he came to us. Even from the very beginning, isn't it amazing that Adam, after he fell, didn't return running back to God and ask pardon, but no, he ran away further, didn't he, and hid. God had to come seeking Adam, didn't he? And it's always that way, is God seeking man. Isn't it strange that in so many of our prayers we think God's our adversary? Even our very attitude towards God is the fact we've got to make him or persuade him or tease him into it somehow. And it's never so. He's more on our side than we are. He's more for us than we are for ourselves. He came all the way outside the camp to meet the leper out there. And he came all the way out to me and all the way out to you. All the way from heaven, all the way to earth, all the way out of church to find you wherever you were. The priest had to come to the leper. The leper couldn't come to the priest. And our wonderful Christ, our wonderful Melchizedek, our high priest, did just that, didn't he? Outside the camp he came, and he was crucified outside the camp, just as those beasts were burned outside the camp. Especially this referring to the heifer that was a great sin offering. Outside it was. And that's what happened. We have to be burned outside in order to find all the sin burned out and all the life of Christ put in. The priest shall go forth out of the camp, and the priest shall look, and behold, if the plague of leprosy be healed in the leper. And one version reads it, if the plague of leprosy be stayed, or in other words, it stopped operating. I have found that lots of people want to be saved, but they don't want to get out of sin. They're not healed of their plague. You know what I mean? It's still operating. They just want to get saved. They just want to come back in the camp. Well, I'm sure that every leper wanted to come back in the camp. Every leper wanted to come back home, didn't he? But he couldn't as long as he was a leper. And we in our modern day of evangelization have opened the door for the lepers to come back into church. And so most of our churches are filled with lepers. They have never been really cleansed. How many of you were in church many a day before you really found God and got cleansed? Let me see your hand. Look at that, would you? Isn't that tremendous? So just think of what our churches are like. Just think of where they are. Why? Because they wanted to make it The human sympathy wants to get people into the camp instead of out of sin. You follow me? And if they were out of their leprosy, they could come in the camp anytime they wanted to. The whole problem isn't the camp. The whole problem is the leprosy. And in our anxiety to get people, quote, saved, and, quote, out of hell, and, quote, into heaven, we've lowered all the barriers, and we just overlook the fact he's a leper. And so what we do, we contaminate everybody in church, don't we? We have not made it truly a question of cleansing from sin. And it's something that's very, very rampant today. And the churches are filled with lepers. As I travel and I go to church, I'm grieved sometimes. You look at a congregation and sometimes you can't find 5 that you know have really ever had a cleansing. The darkness is on them. They're still lepers. They sit in church and sing songs, and some of them can clap their hands and move their feet, but they're still lepers. And that's the one thing the priest was to go out to see if the leprosy was healed. If it's time to really be cleansed and come out of that which he was in. But as long as he's hanging into those things, now that doesn't mean that the person won't stumble into sin. That's not what it means. Because there are sins and there is sin. There are things that we'll stumble into because we still live in the habits of the flesh in which we once lived. That is true. But the great plague has been healed. The great plague has been stayed. It has been cleansed. And that's what he went to look for. And when a person knocks on God's door, that's what the Lord looks out to see. Is he really tired of his sin? Is he ready to get out? Or does he just want to bring it into church? He wants to be a member of the church. He'll even pay his tithes like you pay any fire insurance. But he really wants to keep on with the things he just likes. He's not ready to be cleansed. And that's what the priest is going to look for. That's the one thing. And when that time has come, and he's ready to step out and look to live in the camp of the holy ones, of righteous ones, the ones that are called saints. Saints means holy ones. Then, the next step. If he's healed, well, then the priest shall command to take for him, that is to be cleansed, 2 birds alive. Now, I want you to notice that in this cleansing, it is taken for him. Because you'll notice in the next cleansings, and there's different cleansings, that it's not taken for him, but he has to provide the next sacrifices. But this one, no. This is done for him. Salvation is free. Sanctification isn't. Salvation is free. This is done for him. He doesn't have to pay for these offerings. You see, in those days, these offerings were of considerable value. Just think of today, to have to bring a young heifer in, or to bring a sheep from your flock. Well, it's value, isn't it? It costs you something. But this didn't cost anything. It was done for him. He was commanded to take for him 2 birds. Now, if you notice, one is slain and one isn't, because the 2 birds represent 2 living spirits, 2 living souls. One, the one set free. The other slain. One represents the leper that's set free. The other represents Jesus that was crucified. He was not set free. One of them had to die, didn't he? One had to die. There is no remission for sin without blood. One of those birds had to die. One of those spirits had to die. Either ours or God's.